Hello and welcome once again to the Progressions of Consciousness Internet Radio broadcast. This is your host, Keith David Henry, and we're here courtesy of the Community Listening Network. That's www.clnradio.com. We're picking up with part 2 of the program with the subject the fallacy of separation. The ideal being that that any type of actual separation exists at all is pretty much being scientifically disproven from the standpoint, of course, of mathematics and theory. And I don't think that it's an accident that at this time in the history of mankind that science is starting to say, hey, everything is connected, and there really is no true substantive separation except in our perception. And one of the things I've spent a lot of time talking about, not only in the last program but in prior programs, is how religion tends to foster and bolster that idea of separation. And in not too distant history, when people have approached the nature of man from the standpoint of science or esotery, which was it's called metaphysics, their ideals were often rejected, and people themselves were often not only vilified but threatened with physical harm by none other than the religious establishment. And this is not anything new. It's not unique to the past. Even today, you'd be hard-pressed to find someone that's involved in any kind of religion that would be willing to discuss alternate possibilities with regard to what they believe about God. And their basis for this pretty much is that, they have their holy writing, and their holy writing is their sole source of information, and anything other than the interpretation of those that teach from their holy writing is either demonic, from the devil, or it's foolishness. And this is the nature of the beast. I don't suspect that's going to change anytime soon. And I enjoy the freedom on this program to pretty much speak about these things with whatever degree of freedom I desire, and it's the option of the listener to either keep listening or not. But I'm hoping that there are enough people listening and considering these things that I'm making a difference. And I'm not trying to replace anybody's thoughts about God with my own. What I'm attempting to do is to get people to genuinely start thinking and start looking at it, among other ways, from a historic standpoint. And it's exactly what Adolf Hitler meant when he said people without a sense of history are like people without eyes and ears. They're deaf and dumb, because they don't realize that this game has been played throughout history. The game of controlling people and controlling the way people think and discouraging them from thinking logically or thinking critically is not something that just happened, in the last 6,000 years or even 10,000 years. It's a perennial method of control, and it invariably takes the form of some sort of religion. That's just the way it is. Now, in the last program, we started getting into a little bit of physics, and the purpose of that was to kind of show you where science is in terms of what it thinks the true nature of the universe is. And again, the whole thrust is to discuss the concept of the fallacy of separation for this show, and probably the next one coming up as well. And the premise is that we are not separate. We are all connected. We are all one. However, we are each individual subjective beings. These two concepts are not mutually exclusive. The reason that it may seem difficult to think of ourselves both as separate or not separate entities, but all one, and yet at the same time we have an individual consciousness. The reason it's difficult to think about those terms is because we don't see a great difference between separation and subjectivity when there really is. We don't see a difference between relativity and opposition, and there is. We've been conditioned to think of these terms in such a way that it would make it almost impossible to reconcile the idea of the individual subjective moral agent that is also part of one, wherein no separation, no true separation actually exists, and that this dynamic fits into the category of what I call the subjectivity experiment of source. The idea of each one of us individually becoming in touch with our individuality to the degree that we are a part of the whole. And I know that that sounds contradictory. And that's one of the reasons I'm taking so much time dealing with this, because we have to kind of start thinking about how we look at things and why we look at things, and changing our thinking a bit so that we can tap into that creativity that is really going to be the hallmark of the Aquarian Age. We're moving into a time in the history of mankind when we are going to begin to explore our own divinity from the standpoint of individual creativity that is collaborative in nature and in effect, without giving up that subjective individuality. Okay, so I started getting into the four laws of the universe and how we feel they're connected, and then I started talking a little bit about astrophysics, where one of the concepts was that matter can't approach or exceed the speed of light, but that the universe itself was expanding faster than the speed of light. This is based on experiments, empirical experiments. This is not just mathematics. So how can that be? How can it be that the universe is expanding faster than light? The other thing that seems somewhat interesting is when you think about things from in terms of the Big Bang, and we're saying that a universe, it was an extremely dense point of energy that somehow became matter, exploded, and now it's all the matter that we observe in the universe as a result of that Big Bang, and that universe is constantly expanding. Now, based on various theories of gravity, for instance, it makes sense that after an explosion, that the result of that explosion would be expanding in every direction. But there are two very important things about the dynamic of that expansion that once again have the physicists scratching their head. Number one, the gamma radiation that has been discovered, that is essentially the signature, the sound signature of the Big Bang. Scientists have found that the pattern of that expansion is extremely symmetrical, meaning that when you look at any explosion, what you typically find is that different particles go off into different directions, and there's small pieces and then there are large pieces, and it's not a uniform explosion. Well, the sound that is theorized to be, the gamma radiation that is the signature of that initial explosion is very, very symmetrical, which is puzzling the scientists, because how could it be so symmetrical? And the one thing that convinces me that science is on the right track is, the more information they get, the more questions they get. It's getting to the point where they can't keep up with the questions they're coming up with. They get one answer, and that one answer creates 100 more questions. And that, to me, is really, a very good indicator that you're on the right track when you have many more questions than you have answers. So, the other strange thing about this expansion of the universe based on the Big Bang is that the universe is not only expanding, but it seems to be accelerating. The galaxies are accelerating away from each other. Well, that is also contrary to the physical laws of which we're aware, because the results of the explosion, at the very least, should be a constant speed, but they should probably be slowing down. But the expansion is speeding up. And there are several other things. For instance, the existence of black holes, which was also debated for quite some time. And I don't know why people love to give Albert Einstein such a hard time with his theories, only to be proven wrong later on. But the existence of black holes has pretty much been proven, as much as you can prove such a thing. And now it's thought that black holes exist in the center of every galaxy. That every single galaxy, or at least the vast majority of the galaxies, have massive black holes in the center of them. And these black holes, they act, in some ways, in contradiction to the known laws of physics. So physics has come up with a concept that they're calling dark matter. So what they're saying is that, whatever is happening out there is not a contradiction of the laws and the theories and the mathematics that we have recently come up with. It's just that there's matter that we can't see that's causing the universe to act so strangely. Because then, we fit everything conveniently into our theories, and it works out pretty well. And I have nothing against that. That's the nature of science, of unfoldment. As I said, degrees of accuracy. If anyone ever thinks that they have absolute truth, they are the victims of programming. They're the victims of conditioning. But I would like to throw something else into the mix, and I'm not the only one. I believe there are actually two additional forces that, by and large, have not been considered by science to exist. So that you have the electromagnetic force, you have the gravitational force, you have the subatomic strong force, and you have the subatomic weak force. But I believe there are two additional forces called the interdimensional strong force and interdimensional weak force. And that is these forces that are responsible for some of the strange things that are happening in the universe. And for instance, of the four forces that we spoke about, gravity seems to be relatively weak compared to the others. So what scientists have postulated is that gravity didn't originate, or does not have its point of origin in this universe or in this dimension, but that it is leaking from other dimensions into this one, or into this universe. And that's why the force of gravity seems so relatively weak, for instance, as compared to the forces of electromagnetics and the subatomic strong and weak force. And we could go on ad infinitum, but the idea is that there's a radical rethinking going on in the areas of science. Now, the reason there's a radical rethinking going on is because we are at a time in history, we are at a time of apocalypse. And the word apocalypse is the same word that is translated revelation in the King James Bible. It is an uncovering or an unfolding. And I believe that what is being uncovered is just enough information, which is quite a lot actually, relatively speaking, but just enough information for us to begin to think differently about who we are in relation to each other, in relationship to the universe, and in relationship to God, whatever that word might mean to you. So with these additional two forces in the mix, maybe there's even more questions. And I don't think that mainstream science recognizes these two forces, but I think more and more people are beginning to think about them. But the most, to me, the most significant element of all of this is the ideals that physicists are starting to come up with about the connectedness of all of us, the unification of all of us. Now, if you think about it, if you really start looking at things that way, that can be a little bit scary, because now there's no God with a lightning bolt in his hand looking over your shoulder, prepared to zap you if you don't do what he says. There's no one that's making you responsible to a set of rules or laws that if you don't do them, you're going to hell. That can be a little scary, because now, who do you rely upon? What direction do you look in for who you are, to help define who you are or where you belong in the grand scheme of things? Well, guess what? There's only one place to look, and that is within. There's only one place else to look, and that is within. And that is what we have been told not to do. We have been told that we are depraved, that we can't trust our conscience, that we're evil, that we are beings that belong to this, belong to the devil, that we've been corrupted, that we've fallen from favor with God, and that our only hope is to do whatever is necessary to restore that connection. Well, what if that really is a lie? I mean, what if it is a lie that we're not separate from God? Where do we go with it then? What do we do then? Now, I remember having a conversation with, at least two people in the past 10 years that have echoed the same sentiment about religion, and they would say, I guess religion is okay, but they couldn't understand why somebody needs a book to tell them how to treat people. Why do I need some kind of code to tell me not to take something from my neighbor that doesn't belong to me, or not to steal, not to kill my neighbor? I mean, there's really no need to have a book to tell you to do that. Now, there are certain people that, if you don't give them a certain set of guidelines, that they're going to be impossible or difficult to work with. Well, we have ways of dealing with these people, but the people that are of that persuasion are not going to listen to me, you, the Bible, or God any more than they're going to listen to the law. So the idea that we need some sort of religious book to govern our behavior, or the behavior of certain people, only applies to people that are already predisposed to being responsible. It's sort of like the saying that, locks are for honest people. If someone wants to break into your house, a lock is not going to stop them. So what are these religions and these types of thought that limit our creativity? What are they designed to do? They're designed to group us all into a group of automatrons and take advantage of our internal power, because the dark oligarchy that is really pulling the strings, the Wizard of Oz in the background behind the curtains, they're aware of this unified field. They're aware of the connectivity of all of us to a greater source that is, far beyond what we know. They have this information and they're guarding it from us. But a lot of us are starting to wake up and say, hey, this is a bunch of BS. These few people, who are these few people to control my destiny? And we put these people on medication. A lot of the kids, some of you are familiar with the indigo children that are being born. And, an indigo child, for the most part, is not someone you can slap in a traditional classroom and expect them to sit there with their hands folded, reading from a textbook or listening to someone read from a textbook that has things that just basically seem either ridiculous or boring. So let's put them on Ritalin. And if you really want to talk about the scope of this problem, when you start to realize that a full 10%, folks, of our kids are on these psychotropic drugs, like Ritalin, which are very, very powerful drugs. 10%. Doesn't that sound unreasonable to anyone but me? You mean to tell me that 10% of the people, of the kids in these classes, all of a sudden, for some reason, have a lack of ability to cope with the world and have to be put on drugs? Well, no, that's not what's happening. What's happening is we're in a stage of awakening where the kids are part of that stage as well, and they just don't like what they see, and it doesn't feel comfortable to them, and the system as it exists today seems very foreign to them. And they're here to shake things up. They're here to help wake us up. They are our teachers, and we should be listening to them. So what is this big secret that I claim is being hidden from the masses? What are, quote unquote, what are they not telling us? Well, what they're not telling us is that we are, in totality, and with no need for growth or change, we are divine. We are little creators that were put down here to create, that chose to come here to create. And rather than being free to create something beautiful and mystical and something where everything benefits, there is a very small subset of the population of the planet that has used conditioning to control that power for their own benefit. Now, for as long as I can remember, as long as I can remember coming up as a kid, I can't ever remember ever wanting to take something from someone that didn't belong to me. Now, I can imagine wanting to have something like they had, but the idea of taking it from them, I mean, where does that come from? Well, that comes from a paradigm of separation that doesn't realize if I take something that doesn't belong to me from someone else, I'm actually stealing from myself. I'm harming myself because they're part of me. They are me. We're one. But at the same time, rather than taking what they have, why not create something unique of my own that is even more satisfying than what they have? And I think, a lot of this is where, people talk about the weakness of the senses, and that the body is weak and the body is sinful because the body has certain appetites. I mean, sometimes you see something that looks attractive and you want it. And we've been told that even that desire is bad. And I don't think that people understand that when you take a natural impulse and you relegate it to something that is bad, you don't get rid of the impulse. You don't change the impulse. You just pervert the impulse. And the impulse becomes stronger. And the impulse, the longer you suppress it, the more perverted it becomes and the stronger it becomes until it's released in such a way that it is so destructive and so perverted that people look at that and say, see, I told you the body is bad, humans are evil. But it's not the body and the evil, or the humans that are evil. It's that idea of prohibition. Prohibition. That is what creates the evil. I mean, if you look, for instance, at drugs in this country, you know, and there's a big push to decriminalize the drugs, and to some degree they are, and we could get into a very long debate about that, you know, things like, you know, giving needles to addicts and things like that, or, you know, treating a drug addiction as a disease, which to me, you know, there's a lot of humanity involved in that. It's a very humane way to look at it, because for the most part, the psyche of people on this planet is so screwed up because of the way our mentality has been screwed with, and the way our heads have been screwed with by this dark oligarchy, that people will do anything to try to escape reality, because it doesn't make any sense. It's completely crazy out there, and it gets to the point where, you know, people are jumping off of bridges because of the things that people do to them and do to each other. And it's not a terrible world, and it's not the people that are terrible. We're part of a system that is designed to create that kind of chaos, to keep us preoccupied with the chaos, whether you're talking about war, whether you're talking about the prohibition of religion, or the prohibition of creativity, of critical thought, of new ideals that are not commonly held. We're victims of a society and of a world that is designed to squash that kind of thing, and to squash it violently, and to squash it quickly before people start thinking about it and say, hey, maybe there's something to that. But we're in an unprecedented time in history when people can pretty much say whatever they want now. People are allowed to express themselves. But we're also in an unprecedented time because people are starting to wake up. People are starting to see that, hey, there's more to this thing than we've been told. And people are starting to say, I've been lied to. Now, you take, for instance, you know, I tend to talk a lot about religion and Christianity. And I know, you know, many people, beautiful, loving souls that express their devotion to mankind through religion. And I don't see, you know, really, there's nothing wrong with religion as long as you know what it is. The parts of religion that are destructive are the parts that tend to foster that idea of separation. So that no matter how loving you are, and no matter how altruistic you are, there's always this shadow looming over your head. And there are times when you find yourself in a position where you're not acting the way that even you believe that you should behave. And you get this, the guilty conscience, and you have the whole roller coaster of, you know, fighting appetites or acting in certain ways that you've been told that you shouldn't act, and you don't know what to do with them. Well, thank God you have, according to your religion, a way to deal with that. You have, you know, the forgiveness of God, but even with the forgiveness of God, you still got to stop doing that thing. You still got to change the way you look at that thing, or you're going to be in this perpetual cycle of forgiveness and repentance and you know, guilty conscience and all these other things. And we say, well, you know, God forgives and God is gracious and God is good. And I'd be the last one to agree with that, but the systems that are in place that represent themselves as from God have nothing to do with God or goodness. There are ways to keep us looking at ourselves as separate. Okay, so I'd like to refer you once again to my website, www.don'treadthisbook.net, and we're going to look once again at my progressions of consciousness chart. And we're going to be looking at the first diagram. We're going to start from the beginning with this. I just want to remind everyone, you're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness Internet Radio broadcast. I'm your host, Keith David Henry, and we're on CLN, the Community Listening Network. That's www.clnradio.com. So I'd like to give everyone an opportunity to take a look at that website. I'll give you a few minutes to get there. And when you go to the website, in the left column under Book Information, you'll see a link that says Progressions of Consciousness Chart. Now we're going to begin talking about what I'm calling the four progressions of consciousness states. And this is based on a model that I've come up with called the Progressions of Consciousness States model. And once again, I said this early on, that this is strictly a model. It's not meant to be, the truth to end all truth, or is not meant to encourage you to throw away anything that you think about who you are, who we are as a species. But it's a model that I feel will help us really characterize more and even identify with our own myth and what that might actually mean to us in the greater scheme of things. So the first state of consciousness I'm calling the slumber state, or the sleep state. And you've heard often people talking about, well, we're in an age when people are waking up. Well, what are we waking up from? Well, we're waking up from the slumber state. And the slumber state encompasses a point of view that I call exclusive subjectivity. Exclusive subjectivity. As I said before, subjectivity is not a bad thing. It's not a negative thing. Subjectivity is the whole reason we've manifested as individuals as part of Source's subjectivity experiment. But the way that subjectivity has been expressed by us, by and large, has been in a paradigm of exclusivity. In other words, I'm separate from you. And the one thing the one dynamic that invariably exists in the slumber state is the idea of separation, and that separateness always manifests as some kind of war, some kind of opposition between me and that with which I believe I'm separate. And from the standpoint of religion, there are lots of thoughts that say that people that are quote unquote unsaved or unregenerate are at war with God. But even after you get quote unquote saved or regenerate or whatever it is, or you're baptized or whatever happens to you, now you're at war with your body and the devil. So there's always some kind of war going on. There's always some kind of fighting, some sort of struggle that reinforces the idea of separation between us and God, or us and each other. I can't think of a single exception, and if you can think of one, please go to the website and send me a comment, because I'll put it on the air. But I can't think of any situation of separation where there's not some kind of war involved. Well, this is the slumber state. We're asleep. All we rely upon is what the body senses, the perception, and the ego brain tell us. All of these mechanisms that are designed for perception, that's all we believe we have to guide us through this world. So, we've got all these esoteric things that are happening around us. We identify with the idea of spirit, even if, a person is not particularly religious or spiritually inclined. they kind of know what that is. We know about the subconscious. We don't really know what it is or where it is. We know we have thoughts. We know we have a mind. We know we have these emotions. We talk about things like fate. We talk about things like thought. All of these things are sort of what I characterize in the chart as the esoteric world. And there are all trappings of estrangement. I think I spelled that wrong on the chart there, but it's characterized as estrangement or separation. So, maybe there is a God, but, you're not going to know until after you die, or, maybe you believe you know what God is all about now, but you still don't know all of it. Some of it, enough where you don't go to hell. Or maybe you know enough to be a, relatively happy, productive person in life. Or maybe you feel that it doesn't matter at all, either way, and you're just living your life. But there's still that element of, what is this all about, man? I mean, where did all this stuff come from? What does it mean? I mean, you're born as a baby. As soon as you come out of the womb, like the Bible says, a man is a few days and he's full of trouble. First thing that happens is the doctor smacks you, and you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. But you get smacked, and then you're crying, and there you were in this nice, comfortable, warm, wet environment, and you got kicked out of there. And all these people are looking at you, smiling at you, and you have no idea what's going on. All you know now is you're in the world. And then, you live for about 100 years, and then you die. I mean, there's got to be more to it than that. So what do? We tap into that cloud of the esoteric world, and we draw from it characterizations that make life meaningful to us, that make it so that, there's got to be some reason we're here. And most of us, that esoteric outlook manifests in some sort of religion, and as I said, I have no problem with that, especially if it keeps you from offing yourself, jumping off a bridge, what's it all about, or going crazy, But I know, when I was a kid, I often thought, what in the world is this all about? I know there's more to this than, getting up every day and going to school and getting a job and graduating and having kids and dying, and they do the same thing. There's got to be more to this. Somebody's not telling us everything. There's something missing from the equation. And then when I got into Christianity, I was ecstatic for the first few years, because I'm thinking, all these questions I've ever had about life and who I was and where I was going, I now have all the answers. Little did I know that having all the answers is probably not the place you want to be. Because eventually you have other questions that can't be answered, but you have to somehow fit those questions into your answers rather than the other way around. And you end up finding yourself in a position where what you are practicing, what you are living, is not nearly what you profess you should be doing. Now, there are some people that are like that, but for the most part, these are not religious people. These are people that really couldn't, give two hoots what anyone thinks. And they're living their lives, and they're enjoying their lives. And they come under, criticism and ostracization by some people. But in general, they're happy people. And I think these are the people that have found the secret. Well, the secret is to become that individual. The secret is not to dance to anyone else's drum beat. Dance to your own. And if your drum beat seems so much stranger than anyone else's, then so be it. Because all these people that are marching to everyone else's drum beat, what's actually happening is they don't think you're weird. They're wondering what you have. They're curious. What in the world? What does this guy have that, he doesn't care what people think of him? He doesn't care, what other people are doing. He's going to follow what's in his heart. And it's these people that have done that traditionally, that have followed what's in their heart, that have changed the world. And your world may be your home or your neighborhood or your family. It doesn't have to be the whole world, literally. But that's one of the points I'm trying to make, is that connectedness that we have as if you want to say spiritual entities, or as spirit entities, that you could be in a room all by yourself and never walk out the door, but your ability to connect with your own inner self, your own intuition, your own God consciousness is going to affect the whole world, even though you might not say a word to them. Well, this is who we really are. This is the nature of our connectedness, and this is the antithesis of the idea of separation, that we are not connected at all. Once again, you're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness radio broadcast. I'm Keith David Henry, and we are here courtesy of CLN, the Community Listening Network. Now, getting back to the Progressions of Consciousness chart, you'll note that, oh, by the way, if you're on the website, I mean, these images are pretty large, so if you're using Internet Explorer, you can hit the F11 key, and that will give you a full window view where you can see the entire chart on one screen, so you don't have to keep scrolling up and down to see it. And then when you're done, you just hit F11 again, and it'll return you to the normal view. So in my diagram here, the slumber state, the first of four diagrams in the chart, you'll see I've got these circles all around in an elliptical kind of pattern. Well, they're 12 circles, and basically those 12 circles represent all of humanity. So we have humans, or people, individuals, that all they know is that they themselves are an individual, and that there are individuals around them. I'll never forget when I was, I guess I must have been maybe 15 or 16 years old, and I was walking home from school one day, and walking down the street, and all of a sudden, you ever have like an epiphany where you just look at something where you've never really looked at it before, and I see all these people walking back and forth on the street, and it was a shopping district where the school was, so there were always a lot of people, in the morning and in the afternoon. And it just, I don't know how to explain it, except for it just came over me that here were all these people inches away from each other that really had no sense of connectedness to each other. They were just these people, they're obstacles in the road that, if I walk straight, I'll probably bump into them, so I got to pay attention to them, and I got to go around them, and make sure I don't bump into them. And I started thinking, who are all these people? Where are they going? What's on their mind? And during that time of my life, I had already started to experience what I would call an awakening, but I didn't know what to make of it. I really didn't know anyone else that I could really talk to about these things. There was one gentleman who lived around the corner from me who actually was an ordained minister, and every now and then I would talk to him about some things, and he was, into, some metaphysical things like astral projection and everything, and that was a little bit too much for me at that time in life. But at least he was someone that, when you talk to him, he was talking outside of the box about things and about life and the nature of life. And it was a bit refreshing, but for the most part, it was really somewhat of a lonely experience, and not because people excluded me, but because, I thought so differently about things, and I looked at things so differently that I just didn't feel comfortable being in a traditional posture socially with people. So as a result, most of the time I was smoking pot, getting high, and listening to head music, because we could all get into that. It was like, shut out the world, and the music was great, and being stoned was great. And I'm not encouraging anyone to break the law or to do anything like that. What I'm saying is that that to me was kind of an esoteric outlook, because it was an activity that transcended, normal things. You get high, all of a sudden you're looking at things differently, you're feeling things different. And, even though most of my friends really, I couldn't communicate with them on the level I wanted to about those things, at least we could share that ritual, if you will. But a vast majority of the time, I was alone. I was alone with my own thoughts. And I would write, and I would draw. And the things I would draw, I would just look at them and I'd say, where is this stuff coming from? It's nothing I'd seen before. There's nothing that I'd read that would really make me look at things the way I was looking at them. They were just these internal thoughts that were just pouring out onto the page. That was, my wake-up call that, hey, there is stuff going on that you're not being told about. There's stuff happening that you haven't been taught. So from a very early age, I had an appetite for the esoteric. And I had some, perhaps in a later program, I'll get more into some of the experiences I had, but one of the things that really symbolized my life back then was the feeling that, hey, I'm all alone. I'm by myself. Yet any opportunity that I had to help someone or to make someone's life better, I would take that opportunity, because even though I felt alone, I felt that the other people that were around me were part of this phenomenon called life, and I felt this strong sense of connection to them. So that's kind of a paradoxical paradigm, if you think about it. I feel alone, and yet I feel so connected. But I don't feel like I was ever treated as if I was a part of others, because of, obviously, certain ways I looked at things, and just, I guess you could say, maybe my strange way of looking at things. But I always felt that sense of connectedness. And the other thing is, I always felt a sense of connectedness to God, for lack of a better term. I felt that there was this benevolent force in the universe that somehow was aware of me, and, for lack of a better word, loved me, and was concerned about me in some form or another. So it was a very natural transition into Christianity, because that's one of the things that Christianity teaches. God loves you and Jesus loves you. All right? And then, of course, once you get past that, okay, now here's the rule book, and you better do this or you're going to hell. So, I mean, it was clear that I wouldn't have survived in that system very long, regardless of the reasons why I ostensibly separated myself from that system. But then I started getting into even more and more esoteric things. I started dealing with crystals and gemstones. I felt when I would, get in the presence of certain gemstones, I would literally feel a field of energy around the gemstone. And I started realizing that there were real, legitimate energetics to these stones, and I started using them for different purposes. And I found that they would enhance certain of my senses, not the five senses, the sixth sense, if you will. I found that literally I could use them to heal people, which was really kind of cool. Now, I mean, it's arguable whether it was the stones that were actually doing the healing, or whether it was just my paradigm or my outlook or my energetic level. I'm convinced now that, it's either some combination or neither, because, I had a conversation with someone, and we were talking about gemstones, and I said, you could just as easily get caught up and religious about these things such as gemstones and tarot and all these other things as you can Christianity. You know, it's not the object, it's not the practice, it's the person. And, you know, religion is good if it's being used for good. Crystals are good if they're being used for good, if they're being used for growth, but you don't want to camp out anywhere. You don't want to, you know, live anywhere. You want to always be growing and expanding. That's the nature of the universe. So anyway, when going back to the chart, this first idea of being asleep, of being in slumber, is literally a miserable place of existence, because the sense of separation is overwhelming. In fact, it's so strong that many people will join, for instance, gangs, just to get a sense of belonging, a sense of you know, social connectedness to something. And they don't care if they're, you know, killing people or, you know, raping people or stealing from people. They're part of a community now. They feel connected to something. Well, isn't it a shame that we have to go to those extremes to experience something that already exists? I mean, isn't it a shame that the systems that are in place that, you know, to have traditionally filled that void have so little credibility that people turn to things such as gangs. I mean, if you took the average kid from the time he was 4 or 5 years old and taught him that he was the center of the universe and that he is beautiful and that he is connected to everything, I don't think you'd have gangs, because there wouldn't be that void to need to fill. And I think that's one of the places we're going with the Aquarian Age, is because it is a place where people are going to just realize just intuitively, and as a matter of course, that we are part of something that is both greater than ourselves and composed of ourselves individually and collectively. And that this idea of separation, that, you know, the Russians or the Japanese or the Muslims or some other group of people is evil and God's on our side, which, you know, that whole thing, you know, just smacks of war. It's designed to create war. I mean, you think about it, you know, the Muslim thinks God's on his side. You know, the patriotic American thinks God's on his side, and they both think the other one's not serving God but the devil. So, you know, one of the things I thought about was, you know, maybe God is behind all of this, but he's selling arms to both sides. I mean, that would explain the dynamic. I mean, that's certainly true of the military-industrial complex of the arms dealers in this world. They're selling arms to both sides. That's why they create wars. If you think that the revenue that is generated by the oil industry is tremendous, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the revenue that is generated by wars. Well, just like any other business, you need to have some sense of profitability. And how can a military industrial complex ensure profitability? Well, that's an easy one. They just make sure there's always a war somewhere. All right? I mean, it just doesn't take that much imagination to figure that one out. But it's easy to create such an atmosphere of war with people that are asleep and under the illusion that they are separate, that we are separate from each other. Now, you know, a majority of that kind of thought comes from racism. And racism, you can't mathematically work out racism. You can't logically explain it, because there's no basis of truth to racism. I'm not going to say there's no, as I said before, that there are not certain stereotypes that make for good jokes, and I'm the first one to make fun of myself. I don't care about that. You're not going to hurt my feelings. But you also can't tell me that someone is qualitatively worse than you because of the color of their skin. And the way people are is that, by and large, people make up their minds about something, and then they spend the rest of their mental effort justifying it. Has nothing to do with coming to some logical conclusion about something that's true. People have their preconceived notions, their preconditioned notions, and they spend most of their mental effort not trying to determine whether or not there's any basis to it, but rather they spend their mental effort in an attempt to confirm or to fit what they observe with their senses into that paradigm. Most people are not researchers. Most people are not scientific or logical in their approach to life. Most people base their lives upon, things that have emotionally happened to them in their lives, how they've been conditioned, how they've been mistreated, or what they've been taught, the people they've hung around, what's socially acceptable, and peer pressure is by no means the least offender in this whole area, where, even if a person wants to associate with another person, they're afraid of what someone will think, even though they themselves may have no problem whatsoever with the person. But they're more concerned with what their social group thinks than they are about being their own person. And, these same people disguise this behind, a disguise or a mask of, strength. But it doesn't take strength to hurt someone. It doesn't take strength to criticize someone and put someone down. It doesn't take strength to be a racist. Any weak person can be a racist. It takes strength to say, who cares what other people think? I'm going to follow my heart and my mind. And you're really talking about defeating a huge amount of programming to come to that paradigm of connectedness with all people. There has to be something else that sparks that off. And it has to come from the inside. It has to come from the internal, intuitive, conscious connectedness with quote-unquote God. That does not come from watching TV or even going to church necessarily, or praying or meditating or whatever else you might want to do. So we're going to pick this up in the next program. Once again, this is Keith Henry. You're listening to the Progressions of Consciousness program on CLN Radio. I'll see you next week.